My name is Isaiah, and at 33 years old, I have learned that silence is the most expensive luxury in the world. At this year's Thanksgiving dinner, my brother Trey introduced his new girlfriend to the family, and for some reason they all kept staring at me with pity in their eyes. When she finally asked what I do for work, my father Otis cut me off before I could even swallow my food. "Do not embarrass us, Isaiah," he snapped. "Just tell her you drive a truck and be done with it." The whole table erupted in laughter. Trey leaned back in his chair, swirling his expensive wine, and added, "Actually, maybe you should lie this time so you do not sound so pathetic compared to my new promotion." I just smiled and took a sip of my water. They had no idea that the promotion Trey was bragging about depended entirely on a contract with my company. And they certainly did not know that 5 minutes later, a single phone call from my assistant would turn their laughter into absolute terror. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep of the family, only to realize you were actually the wolf. I run a company called Nexus Global Logistics. We are a supply chain management firm that handles cold chain transportation for pharmaceuticals and high-end food products. My fleet consists of 600 trucks, 12 distribution centers, and 3 cargo planes. My net worth is sitting somewhere north of $400 million. But my family does not know any of this. To my mother, Viola, and my father, Otis, I am just Isaiah the college dropout who plays with trucks. I stopped trying to correct them 5 years ago when I asked my father for a $1,000 loan to fix my first delivery van, and he told me he would not throw good money after bad. I fixed that van myself with duct tape and prayers, and I built my empire in silence while my brother Trey climbed the corporate ladder in sales fueled by leased luxury cars and our parents' constant praise. The drive to Trey's house for Thanksgiving was 18 hours long. I had not come from my penthouse in Chicago. I had come straight from the coast where a hurricane had decimated a small community. My fleet was there delivering fresh water and medical supplies pro bono. I had been on the ground for 3 days moving crates, sleeping in the cab of my truck, and eating protein bars. I was exhausted. I was wearing my old Timberland boots that were stained with mud and a heavy flannel jacket that smelled of rain and diesel fuel. I looked rough, but I felt good because I knew I had helped people. When I pulled my 2018 Ford F-150 into the driveway of the house Trey was renting in an upscale suburb of Atlanta, I felt a knot form in my stomach. The house was a McMansion, a stucco monstrosity that screamed new money. Parked in the driveway was Trey's silver Mercedes and my father's Cadillac. My truck looked out of place like a workhorse in a showroom of ponies. I had not even put the truck in park when the front door flew open. Trey marched out. He was wearing a suit. Who wears a three-piece suit to Thanksgiving dinner at their own house? He looked frantic, waving his arms at me to stop. I rolled down the window, letting the cold November air bite my face. "Hey, big brother," I said, trying to keep my voice cheerful. "Happy Thanksgiving." Trey did not smile. He looked at my truck with pure disgust. "You cannot park that here, Isaiah," he hissed, looking around at the neighbors' houses as if my truck was leaking radioactive waste. "It is a driveway, Trey," I said. "That is what it is for." "Not in this neighborhood," Trey snapped, adjusting his silk tie. "The homeowners association is strict. No commercial vehicles and certainly no beat-up trucks that look like they just rolled out of a swamp. You need to move it." I sighed, gripping the steering wheel. "I just drove 18 hours, Trey. My legs are cramping. Can I just leave it here for an hour while I unload the gifts?" "No," Trey said, firmly pointing down the street. "Park it 2 blocks over behind the community center. Nobody will see it there. And hurry up. Brittany is arriving in 20 minutes, and I do not want her first impression of my family to be this monstrosity." I stared at him for a moment. I could have told him right then. I could have told him that the homeowners association he was so afraid of was managed by a property group I was in the process of acquiring. I could have told him that my truck was dirty because I was saving lives while he was worried about curb appeal. But I didn't. I just nodded slowly. Fine, I said. I will move it. I reversed out of the driveway and drove 2 blocks away, parking behind a row of hedges near the community dumpsters. I grabbed my duffel bag and began the long walk back to the house. The wind was cutting through my flannel jacket, but I walked with my head high. I was used to hard work. I was used to being uncomfortable. It was something Trey knew nothing about. When I finally reached the front door, I rang the bell. My mother, Viola, opened it. She was dressed in her Sunday best, pearls around her neck, hair perfectly coiffed. She looked me up and down, and her lip curled slightly. Isaiah, she said, not moving to hug me. You look tired. And is that mud on your boots? I wiped my feet on the welcome mat aggressively. Hello to you too, Mom. Yes, it is mud. I was working. On Thanksgiving, she sighed, shaking her head as she stepped aside to let me in. Always chasing a dollar. If you had listened to your father and finished your degree, you could have a salary like Trey and get paid holidays. But come in, I suppose. Just try not to touch the walls. Trey is renting this place and we want to get the deposit back. I walked into the foyer. The house smelled of roasting turkey and expensive candles, but underneath it I could smell the distinct scent of pretension. My father, Otis, was sitting in the living room watching football on a massive television. He did not look up when I entered. Hey, Dad, I said, dropping my bag by the door. Hey, he grunted, eyes glued to the screen. Keep that bag out of the walkway. Trey is expecting important guests. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water. Trey was there, tasting the gravy. He looked stressed. Sweat was beading on his forehead. Everything okay? I asked, leaning against the counter. It is a big day, Isaiah, Trey said, stirring the pot frantically. Not only is Brittany coming, but I have a huge deal closing on Monday. If this goes through, I make vice president. I need everything to be perfect today. So please just try to blend in. Don't tell any of your trucker stories. Don't talk about unions or gas prices. Just eat and smile. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a distinctive ringtone I had set for urgent business. I pulled it out. The caller ID read, Sarah, VP of Operations. I have to take this, I said, holding up a finger. I stepped into the hallway and answered. Go ahead, Sarah. Isaiah. We have a problem at the port of Savannah. Sarah's voice was tense. Customs is holding the $50 million shipment of vaccine coolers. They are saying the paperwork for the cold chain compliance is missing. If we do not clear this in 2 hours, the temperature sensors will trigger a violation, and the client will void the contract. I pinched the bridge of my nose. The paperwork is digital, Sarah. It is on the secure server. Tell the Port Authority to check the blockchain verify code I sent yesterday. If they give you pushback, tell them to call the senator. I donated to his campaign last month for this exact reason. I will handle it, boss, Sarah said. Sorry to bother you on the holiday. No problem, fix it, I said and hung up. When I turned around, I saw my father standing in the doorway of the living room. He had been listening. He had a look of smug satisfaction on his face. Trouble with the boss? Otis asked with a smirk. Let me guess. You were late with a delivery again. Or did you lose a package? Something like that, I said, slipping the phone back into my pocket. You better be careful, Isaiah, Otis said, shaking his head. Jobs for people with your skill set are getting harder to find. You don't want to end up unemployed and asking Trey for a loan. He has worked too hard to carry his deadbeat brother. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had taught me to be honest and hard-working, but who now despised me because my work didn't come with a title he could brag about at church. I won't ask Trey for a dime, Dad, I said quietly. I promise you that. Just then the doorbell rang. The energy in the house shifted instantly. Trey ran out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. Mom patted her hair. Dad stood up and buttoned his blazer. It is her, Trey whispered loudly. Everyone act normal. And Isaiah, for the love of God, tuck your shirt in. I watched them scramble to impress a woman they had never met. I tucked my flannel shirt into my jeans and leaned against the wall. I was the spectator at a play I had seen 1,000 times, but this time I had a feeling the ending was going to be very different. The door opened, and in walked Brittany carrying a designer handbag that I recognized immediately. I recognized it not because I followed fashion, but because my company handled the logistics for the genuine brand. And looking at the stitching on the handle, I knew instantly that the bag on her arm was a fake, just like everything else in this house. The moment Brittany stepped through the door, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. She was undeniably striking with hair that was dyed a shade of blonde that cost more than my monthly rent used to be, and a white cashmere coat that looked pristine enough to suggest she had never walked a day in her life. But what caught my eye immediately was not her beauty or the way she clung to Trey's arm like a trophy. It was the bright orange handbag she swung carelessly onto the entryway table. To anyone else in that room, it was a Hermes Birkin, the holy grail of luxury accessories. A bag that costs upwards of $20,000 and requires a wait list of several years. My mother gasped audibly, her eyes widening with a mix of envy and admiration. My father nodded approvingly, seeing the bag as proof that his favorite son had finally landed a woman of high status. Trey beamed, puffing out his chest, as if he had personally stitched the leather himself. But I saw something different. My company Nexus Global Logistics handles the secure supply chain for 3 of the top 5 luxury fashion houses in the world. I have spent hours in temperature-controlled warehouses inspecting shipments of genuine leather goods. I know the smell of authentic Togo leather. I know that the stitching on a real Birkin is done by hand, slightly angled and imperfectly perfect. I looked at the bag sitting on the table. The stitching was dead straight, machine-made. The gold hardware was a shade too yellow. It was a very good fake, probably a super fake that cost a few $100s. But to a man who moves millions of dollars of the real thing, it screamed counterfeit. I took a sip of my water and leaned back against the wall, deciding to keep my mouth shut. There was no point in ruining Trey's moment. Or so I thought. Brittany handed her coat to Trey and then turned her gaze toward me. Her eyes swept over my flannel shirt, my faded jeans, and my work boots. Her nose wrinkled slightly as if she had detected a foul odor. She looked at Trey and then back at me, her expression one of genuine confusion. "Babe, you did not tell me the help was still here," she said loud enough for the entire room to hear. The room went silent. My mother froze with a tray of appetizers in her hand. My father looked at the floor. But Trey did not correct her immediately. He let the insult hang in the air for a second too long, enjoying the power dynamic before he finally chuckled. "He is not the help," Brittany, Trey said, walking over to put his arm around her waist. "That is my brother Isaiah." Brittany's hand flew to her mouth in a gesture of mock surprise. "Oh my God, I am so sorry. I just assumed because of the attire." She gestured vaguely at my clothes. I looked down at my boots. They were clean, but they were clearly made for work, not for show. "It is fine," I said, keeping my voice level. "I just got off a long shift." Brittany tilted her head. "A shift? Oh, you work in delivery? Like Amazon or UPS? That is so noble. My packages are always late, so I know how busy you guys must be." Before I could correct her, Trey jumped in. He walked over to the minibar and poured himself a glass of whiskey, his movements exaggerated and theatrical. "No, babe, Isaiah does not drive for Amazon," Trey said, flashing a grin that was all teeth. "That would be too sophisticated. Isaiah drives a reefer truck. You know, cold storage. He hauls frozen chickens and fish sticks across the country." The room erupted in laughter. It was not a warm family laugh. It was a cruel, sharp sound. My father chuckled, shaking his head, as if my career was a personal failure of his parenting. My mother smiled tightly, trying to smooth over the awkwardness, but clearly amused. Brittany giggled, covering her mouth. "Oh, wow. So that explains the smell. I was wondering why it smelled like a fish market in here." Trey roared with laughter, slapping his knee. Exactly. I tell him all the time to shower twice before coming to my house. You do not want that low-tide scent getting into the upholstery of the furniture. I stood there motionless. I was the CEO of a company that was currently coordinating the transport of life-saving vaccines to 3 different continents. I had just spent 3 days in a disaster zone ensuring that families had clean drinking water. And here I was being mocked by a woman carrying a fake handbag and a brother who was drowning in debt. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. Actually, I started to say I specialize in pharmaceutical logistics and cold chain management for... My father cut me off with a sharp wave of his hand. Enough, Isaiah. Do not bore the poor girl with the details of your truck routes. Nobody wants to hear about traffic jams and way stations on Thanksgiving. Let us go to the table. The food is getting cold. We moved to the dining room. The table was set with fine china and crystal glasses that I knew Trey had rented for the occasion. My mother fussed over the seating arrangement, ensuring that Brittany and Trey sat at the head of the table while I was placed at the far end next to the kitchen door. As we settled in, Trey tapped his spoon against his wine glass. The sharp ping silenced the table. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket and looking around with a self-satisfied smirk. I have a little announcement to make before we eat, Trey said. My mother clasped her hands together. Oh, Trey, is it what I think it is? Trey nodded. As you all know, I have been working as the sales director at MedTech Solutions for 2 years now. It has been a grind, but all that hard work is about to pay off. On Monday morning, I am meeting with the acquisition team for a massive logistics partner. If I close this deal, I am guaranteed a promotion to Vice President of Global Sales. My father slammed his hand on the table, beaming with pride. That is my boy. Vice President. Now that is a title. That is respect. Brittany looked up at Trey with adoration in her eyes. You are amazing, babe. Who is the partner? Trey took a dramatic pause, letting the suspense build. He looked straight at me, his eyes full of condescension, as if he was about to speak a language I couldn't understand. It is a company called GL, Trey said. Nexus Global Logistics. They are the biggest player in the game right now. They are like the Amazon of the supply chain world. Nobody knows who the CEO is. He is supposed to be this ghost, this mysterious figure who never shows his face. They call him the shark because he eats the competition alive. I froze. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth. Nexus Global Logistics. My company. Trey was trying to close a deal with my company. I slowly lowered my fork. I remembered seeing a memo on my desk last week about a potential contract with a mid-sized pharmaceutical supplier called MedTech. My vice president, Sarah, had flagged it. She had said the sales director from MedTech was arrogant, pushy, and had been rude to our administrative staff. She had recommended we pass on the deal. I had not looked at the name of the sales director. I had trusted her judgment and told her to put it on hold. That sales director was my brother. Trey continued, completely oblivious to the fact that the ghost he was talking about was sitting 10 feet away from him, eating cranberry sauce. This deal is worth $50 million over 5 years, Trey bragged, pouring more wine for Brittany. I have been working on their procurement team for months. They were playing hard to get, but I charmed them. I have a meeting with their regional director on Monday to sign the final paperwork. Once that ink is dry, I get a 6-figure bonus and a company car. My mother wiped a tear from her eye. I am so proud of you, Trey. You have always been the ambitious one. You set a goal and you go get it. Not like some people who settle for driving in circles. She did not say my name, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Brittany squeezed Trey's arm. Nexus Global Logistics. That sounds so important. Are you worried about meeting this shark guy? Trey scoffed. Please. The CEO doesn't meet with sales directors. He is probably on a yacht somewhere in the Mediterranean. I am dealing with his underlings, and honestly, I have them wrapped around my finger. I told them if they do not sign with us by Monday, we are taking our business to their competitor. I bluffed them and they folded. That is how you do business. You show strength. I took a sip of water to hide the smile that was threatening to form on my lips. He had bluffed them. He had threatened my team. Sarah must have been laughing when she read his emails. No wonder she had flagged the account. My brother was not just arrogant, he was incompetent. He was trying to strong-arm a company that had a market cap larger than the GDP of some small countries. I decided to test the waters. NGL is a serious company, Trey, I said quietly. They are known for having a very strict code of conduct. Are you sure you want to push them? I heard their CEO is very particular about who he does business with. Trey rolled his eyes and let out a loud groan. Here we go. The truck driver is giving business advice. Stick to checking your tire pressure, Isaiah. You do not understand how corporate negotiations work. It is a game of chicken. And I just won. Brittany laughed, a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. Yeah, Isaiah. Leave the business talk to the executives. Maybe you can tell us a story about, I don't know, a funny license plate you saw on the highway. The table erupted in laughter again. I looked at my father, who was laughing so hard he was red in the face. I looked at my mother, who was beaming at Trey as if he had just invented the cure for cancer. And I looked at Trey, who was sitting there like a king on a throne built of lies and debt. They thought I was pathetic. They thought I was the failure. They had no idea that the fate of Trey's promotion, his bonus, and his entire career was currently sitting in my pocket inside a cell phone that was vibrating with a new message from my VP. I pulled out my phone under the table and glanced at the screen. The text was from Sarah. Boss, the guy from MedTech is calling again. He is threatening to pull the offer if we don't confirm by Monday. Do you want me to cut him loose? I looked up at Trey, who was now toasting to his future wealth. I looked at the fake Hermes bag on the table. I looked at the parents who had dismissed me for a decade. I typed a reply under the table. Don't cut him loose yet. Keep him on the hook. I want to handle this one personally. I put the phone away and picked up my knife and fork. Congratulations, Trey, I said, my voice calm and steady. It sounds like you have everything figured out. I cannot wait to see how Monday goes for you. Trey raised his glass to me. Thanks, little brother. Maybe when I get my bonus, I will buy you a new pair of boots. You are embarrassing the family with those things. I just smiled. I took a bite of turkey. It was dry. But as I chewed, I realized it was the most delicious meal I had ever tasted. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew that Monday was coming. And when it arrived, the shark was not going to be on a yacht in the Mediterranean. He was going to be sitting at the head of the table. And he was going to be very, very hungry. The transition from the living room to the dining area felt less like a family gathering and more like a procession of royalty and their subjects. The smell of roasted turkey and sage stuffing filled the air, but it did nothing to warm the chill in my chest. My mother Viola fluttered around the table, adjusting the name cards she had handwritten in calligraphy. The main table was a masterpiece of rented luxury. There was a gold silk tablecloth, towering centerpieces of autumn flowers, and enough silverware to confuse a diplomat. There were 6 chairs arranged around it. I did a quick head count. Mom, Dad, Trey, Brittany, and me. That was 5 people. There should have been plenty of room. I walked toward the empty chair on the left side of the table, the one furthest from the head where my father sat. I reached out to pull it back, ready to sit down and disappear into the background for the next hour. Stop right there, Isaiah, my mother said, her voice sharp and commanding. I froze, my hand still on the back of the velvet chair. What is it, Mom? That seat is not for you, she said, bustling over with a napkin in her hand. That seat is for Prince. I looked at her blankly. Prince? Who is Prince? Brittany stepped forward, holding a small white poodle that looked like a cotton ball with eyes. This is Prince, she cooed, nuzzling her nose against the dog's fur. He has terrible separation anxiety, Isaiah. If I put him in the other room, he will cry the entire time and ruin the ambiance. He needs to sit right next to Mommy. I looked from the dog to my mother, expecting her to object. My mother was a woman who used to scream if we walked on the carpet with shoes on. The idea of a dog sitting at a formal dining table eating off fine china was something that would have given the old Viola a stroke. But this was the new Viola, the one desperate to please her son's wealthy girlfriend. "Of course he does," my mother said, smiling at the dog. "We cannot have the poor baby crying. Isaiah, be a dear and move your setting." I looked around the table. There were no other chairs. "Move it where, Mom?" My mother pointed a manicured finger toward the corner of the room near the swinging door that led to the kitchen. There was a small folding card table set up there. It was wobbling slightly on the hardwood floor. There was no tablecloth, just a paper napkin and a plastic fork. "We ran out of space at the main table," she said breezily. "And honestly, it is better this way. You will have more room to stretch your legs, and you are so close to the kitchen you can help bring out the dessert when we are ready." I stared at the folding table. It was the kids' table. I was 33 years old. I ran a multinational corporation. I had negotiated contracts with government officials and navigated trade wars. And I was being banished to a card table in the corner so a dog could have a seat of honor. For a second, I felt the urge to flip the main table over, to shatter the crystal glasses and scream the truth until their ears rang. But I pushed it down. Rage is for people who have no control. I had all the control. I just hadn't exercised it yet. "That is fine," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I walked over to the corner and sat down. The chair was metal and cold. From my vantage point, I could see the backs of my family. I was in the room, but I was not part of it. My father, Otis, stood up at the head of the table to carve the turkey. He picked up the electric carving knife and revved it like a chainsaw. The sound cut through the polite conversation. He sliced through the golden skin of the bird, the steam rising up in savory clouds. He began to serve the plates. He piled thick slices of white meat onto Trey's plate. He gave Brittany the drumstick she requested. He served my mother and then himself. Finally, he picked up a plate with some dry scraps of dark meat and a scoop of lumpy mashed potatoes. He walked over and set it down on my card table without making eye contact. "Happy Thanksgiving," he muttered. I picked up my plastic fork. I was hungry. I reached toward the center of the table where a basket of warm rolls was sitting just out of my reach. I stood up to grab one. Otis slammed his hand down on the table, making the silverware rattle. Brittany jumped, and Prince let out a high-pitched bark. "Sit down," Isaiah, my father barked. I stopped mid-motion. "I just wanted a roll, Dad." "Let Trey get his first," Otis said, glaring at me. "He has been working high-stress hours all week. He needs the carbohydrates. You have been driving a truck. You do not need the energy. Let the people who earn the prestige enjoy the fruits of their labor first." Trey laughed, picking up a roll and buttering it slowly while locking eyes with me. "Listen to Dad, Isaiah. He knows how the world works. The lions eat first. The scavengers eat the leftovers." I sat back down. The plastic chair dug into my back. I watched Trey bite into the roll. I watched Brittany feed a piece of premium turkey breast to the dog. The dog ate better than I did, and Isaiah, my father, continued returning to his seat. "When you are done with that plate, do not get comfortable. The generator out back is making a rattling noise. It is disturbing the peace. Go out there and fix it. You are good with your hands, right? Since you cannot contribute to this household financially, the least you can do is some manual labor." I looked down at my plate. The food blurred slightly as a memory forced its way to the surface of my mind. It was 5 years ago, almost to the day. I was sitting at my parents' kitchen table in their old house. It was raining outside, a cold November rain that rattled the windows. I had laid out my business plan in front of them. It was a mess of spreadsheets and diagrams printed at the local library. I had explained my vision for a logistics company that used predictive analytics to optimize supply chains. I had poured my heart out. All I needed was $1,000, just $1,000 to buy a used server and register the LLC. I remembered the look on my father's face. It was the same look he had now. Disappointment. "We do not have money to throw away on your fantasies, Isaiah," he had said, closing the folder and pushing it back to me. "Trey needs tuition money for his MBA. That is an investment. Giving you money to play truck driver is just charity. Go get a real job at the factory. They are hiring. I had walked out into the rain that night with nothing. No money, no support, no coat. I had cried in my car for an hour. And then I had wiped my face and sworn an oath. I swore that I would never ask them for anything ever again. I swore that I would build something so big they would not be able to comprehend it. I mortgaged my small house. I slept in my car. I ate canned beans for 2 years. And I built Nexus Global Logistics from the ground up. I looked up from my plastic plate in the corner. I looked at my mother who was fawning over Trey. She did not know that the nursing home where her mother, my grandmother, lived was costing $8,000 a month. She thought the state was paying for it. She did not know that I was the one writing that check every single month. I paid for the private room. I paid for the extra physical therapy. I paid for the premium meal plan. I did it anonymously. I told the nursing home director that if she ever revealed my name, I would pull the funding. I did it because Grandma was the only one who had ever believed in me. And I did it because I wanted the satisfaction of knowing that while my parents mocked me for being poor, I was silently carrying the financial burden of the family on my back. I watched Trey wipe grease from his chin with a linen napkin. He looked soft. He looked weak. He was a man who had never known hunger. He was a man who thought power came from a job title and a leased car. I picked up my plastic fork and took a bite of the dry turkey. It tasted like ash, but I chewed it slowly. "I will check the generator, Dad," I said, my voice calm. "I would be happy to fix it for you." My father nodded, satisfied that he had put me in my place. "Good. At least you are useful for something." I ate in silence, listening to them talk about vacations I wasn't invited to and investments they didn't understand. They thought they had banished me to the kids' table. They didn't realize that from this corner I could see the entire board. And I was about to checkmate them all. The silence that followed the main course was not peaceful. It was the heavy, expectant silence of an audience waiting for the main act to begin. Trey wiped the corner of his mouth with a linen napkin and pushed his chair back. The floorboards creaked under the weight of his ego. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a shimmering gold envelope. He held it up to the light, letting the chandelier reflect off the metallic paper. "This is a little something I have been working on for a while," Trey announced, his voice booming with false modesty. "I know how hard you both have worked over the years. Mom, you are always complaining about your arthritis in the winter, and Dad, you have not had a real vacation since I graduated high school." He slid the envelope across the table toward my mother. "Go ahead. Open it." My mother's hands trembled as she picked it up. She tore the seal and pulled out a glossy brochure. Her eyes scanned the paper, and then she let out a scream that sounded more like a teenager at a concert than a 60-year-old woman. "Oh my God, Otis, look. It is the Bahamas." My father grabbed the brochure, his eyes widening. "An all-inclusive resort," he read out loud. "2 weeks. Ocean view suite, first-class airfare." Trey leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. "Nothing but the best for the people who raised me. I put the deposit down yesterday. You leave in January, right after the holiday rush." My mother jumped up and rushed over to hug Trey, burying her face in his neck. "Oh, my golden boy, you are a blessing. I told the church group just last week that my Trey would take care of us. This must have cost a fortune." Trey waved his hand dismissively. "It is an investment, Mom. You invested in my education, and now I am paying dividends. That is what successful children do. They provide." My father stood up and shook Trey's hand, gripping his shoulder tightly. "I am proud of you, son. Proud of you. You are a man of substance. You set goals and you crush them. You are the pillar of this family." From my corner table, I watched the scene unfold with a mixture of sadness and secondhand embarrassment. I knew how much that trip cost. I knew because I owned a stake in the travel conglomerate that operated that specific resort chain. I also knew based on the credit alert I had seen on Trey's file that he had financed this trip on a high-interest credit card that was already near its limit. He was digging a hole to buy affection, and my parents were handing him the shovel. Then the room grew quiet again. The celebration subsided, and the energy shifted. Trey turned slowly in his chair. His eyes locked onto me sitting at the wobbly card table near the kitchen door. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by a cold sneer. "I did not forget about you," Isaiah Trey said, reaching into his pocket again. My parents sat back down, watching with amused expressions. Brittany took a sip of wine, her eyes dancing with anticipation. Trey pulled out a small plastic card. He did not hand it to me. He flicked it. The card spun through the air, skittering across the floorboards and coming to rest near my muddy boots. I looked down. It was a gift card. The bright blue logo of Walmart stared up at me. $50, Trey said loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "I know things are tight for you right now. I figured you could use that to buy a new shirt. Or maybe some soap. Because honestly, looking at you sitting there in those rags, it is embarrassing. You look like a beggar, Isaiah." The room erupted in laughter again. My father slapped the table. "Good one, Trey. He does look like a beggar, doesn't he? Maybe he can buy a razor and shave that face while he is at it." My mother chimed in. "Take it, Isaiah. Do not be proud. $50 is a lot of money for someone in your position. You should say thank you to your brother." I looked at the card on the floor. Then I looked at Trey. He was grinning, waiting for me to bend down. He wanted me to bow. He wanted me to crawl on the floor to retrieve his scraps, so he could feel tall. Slowly I stood up. The metal chair scraped against the floor. I bent down and picked up the card. I held it in my hand, feeling the cheap plastic. "Thank you, Trey," I said, my voice low and devoid of gratitude. "See," Trey said, turning to Brittany. "He knows his place," but I was not done. I walked over to the main table. My boots thudded heavily on the wood. I stopped right next to Trey's chair. I looked him dead in the eye. "I appreciate the gesture," I said, "but I think you should keep this." I held the card up with both hands. With a sharp snap, I broke it in half. The sound was like a pistol crack in the silent room. I dropped the two pieces onto his empty dinner plate. "Why would I want it?" Trey asked, his smile faltering. "Because," I said, leaning in close. "I hear things in the industry, Trey. The word on the street is that MedTech is missing its quarterly targets. There are rumors of massive layoffs coming next week. If that NGL deal does not go through on Monday, you might need this $50 more than I do." The color drained from Trey's face. It was instant. The arrogant flush of wine and victory was replaced by a pale, sickly white. He knew MedTech was struggling. It was a secret he had kept from everyone, including himself, but hearing me say it out loud shattered his illusion. "How dare you?" he whispered. My father stood up, his face turning purple with rage. "You ungrateful little brat! Your brother gives you a gift and you throw it in his face. You are jealous. That is what this is. You are jealous because he is taking us to the Bahamas, and you cannot even afford to take us to dinner." I looked at my father. I could have told him right then that I had already set up a trust fund for his retirement. I could have told him that I paid off his mortgage 2 years ago through a shell company so he wouldn't have to worry about payments. But I realized in that moment that he didn't want my help. He wanted my submission. "I am not jealous, Dad," I said. "I am just realistic." Trey stood up so fast his chair tipped over backward. His fists were clenched. The veins in his neck were bulging. He looked like a cornered animal lashing out of fear. "You think you know everything, don't you?" Trey shouted, stepping into my personal space. "You are a loser, Isaiah. You are a truck-driving nobody. I am a director. I make more in a month than you make in a year. Get out of my face before I put you down." He raised his fist, drawing it back to strike me. My mother screamed. My father did not move. I did not flinch. I stood my ground, waiting. I had been in fights on loading docks that would make Trey wet his pants. I was not afraid of a sales director in a polyester blend suit, but the punch never came. "No, Trey, stop!" Brittany shrieked. She jumped up and grabbed his arm, pulling him back. Not because she cared about me, not because she wanted peace. "You are going to get blood on my dress," she yelled, pointing at her white cashmere outfit. "This is dry clean only, Trey. If you hit him, he might bleed on me." Trey froze, his chest heaving. He looked at Brittany, then at me. He lowered his hand slowly, adjusting his jacket. "You are lucky," Trey spat at me. "You are lucky she is here." I looked at the broken gift card on his plate. I looked at the parents who had cheered for my humiliation. And I looked at the brother who had just tried to assault me. "I am not the one who needs luck, Trey," I said quietly. "You have until Monday. Enjoy your weekend." I turned around and walked toward the front door. The silence in the room was deafening. They were confused, they were angry. But for the first time all night, they were also afraid. Because deep down in the pit of their stomachs, they realized that the beggar in the flannel shirt knew something they didn't. And that terrified them more than anything. The silence in the dining room was thick enough to choke on. The two halves of the Walmart gift card sat on Trey's empty dinner plate like a tombstone for his ego. My father Otis was staring at me with a vein throbbing in his temple, his face a mask of purple rage, while my mother Viola looked between her two sons, unsure whether to scream or cry. Brittany was frantically dabbing at a non-existent spot on her dress, trying to distance herself from the violence that hung in the air. For a moment, I thought my father was going to throw me out right then and there. I could see him gathering the breath in his lungs to banish me from the house he did not own. But before he could speak, a sound cut through the tension. It was the ringtone of a cell phone. Not just a standard ringtone, but the opening bars of a rap song about making money and crushing enemies. It was coming from Trey's suit pocket. Trey flinched, breaking the stare down he had locked me in. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He looked at the screen and his entire demeanor changed instantly. The anger vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated smugness. He held the phone up so we could all see the screen. "It is Richard Sterling," Trey announced, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "The CEO of MedTech. He is calling me on Thanksgiving." My mother gasped, clapping her hands together. "On a holiday? Oh, Trey, that means you are practically family to him. He must be calling to confirm the promotion early." My father sat back in his chair, his anger forgotten, replaced by pride. "Answer it, son. Do not keep the man waiting. This is what success sounds like, Isaiah. Take notes." Trey cleared his throat, adjusting his tie as if the person on the other end could see him. He looked at me with a smirk that said, "I have won." Then he did exactly what I hoped he would do. He tapped the green icon, and then he tapped the speaker button. He placed the phone in the center of the table, right next to the crystal gravy boat. "Richard Trey," said, his voice booming with confidence. "Happy Thanksgiving, sir. To what do I owe the pleasure of this call? I am sitting here with my family just telling them about the big news for Monday." We all leaned in. My parents were beaming, expecting to hear praise. Brittany was smiling, thinking about the bonus check that would buy her a real handbag. I leaned in too, but for a different reason. I took a sip of water to hide the smile playing on my lips. The voice that came out of the speaker was not happy. It was not festive. It was a roar of pure, unadulterated fury that shook the silverware. "Shut up, Jackson!" Richard Sterling screamed. The volume was so loud that Prince the Poodle jumped off the chair and scurried under the table. Trey's smile froze. "Excuse me, sir. I do not understand." "You are a fool, Jackson," Sterling shouted, his voice cracking with stress. "I just got off the phone with the executive office of Nexus Global Logistics. Do you know who called me? Their vice president of operations. On Thanksgiving Day, Trey. They called me on a federal holiday not to wish me well, but to tell me that the $50 million contract is suspended indefinitely." The color drained from Trey's face so fast it looked like a magic trick. He went from flush with wine to ghostly white in a heartbeat. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "Suspended," Trey stammered. "But sir, that is impossible." I talked to their procurement guy last week. I told him we needed an answer by Monday. I used the leverage strategy we discussed. You used leverage. Sterling laughed a harsh barking sound. You arrogant idiot! You do not use leverage against a company like NGL. They are the leverage. The vice president told me that their CEO, the man they call the Shark, personally flagged our file. She said there were concerns about the attitude and competence of our lead negotiator. That is you, Trey. They think you are a liability. My mother let out a small whimper, pressing her hand to her mouth. My father looked confused, his mouth hanging open as he stared at the phone as if it had betrayed him. But Sir Trey pleaded, beads of sweat popping out on his forehead. I can fix this. It is just a negotiation tactic. They are testing us. I will call them on Monday morning and— You will not call anyone, Sterling cut him off. If you pick up the phone and call NGL, I will have security throw you out of the building before you can dial the area code. Listen to me closely, Jackson. This deal is the only thing keeping MedTech afloat this quarter. If we lose this contract, we miss our earnings target. If we miss our target, the board fires me. And if the board fires me, I am taking you down with me. The room was deathly silent. The only sound was the heavy breathing of my father and the whir of the refrigerator. You have until Monday at 9 a.m. to figure out how to salvage this, Sterling hissed. I do not care what you have to do. Beg, plead, crawl on your knees. But if that contract is not signed by noon on Monday, do not bother coming into the office. You are fired. And Jackson, if I go down, I will make sure you never work in this industry again. Do you hear me? Yes, sir. Trey whispered, his voice barely audible. I hear you. The line clicked dead. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. It was the silence of a bomb that had just detonated, leaving everyone stunned in the wreckage. Trey stared at the black screen of his phone. His hands were shaking violently. He looked up, and for the first time all night, he did not look like the golden child. He looked like a frightened little boy. He is joking, right? Brittany asked, her voice shrill in the quiet room. Tell me he is joking, Trey. You said the bonus was guaranteed. I put a deposit on the venue for my birthday party. Trey did not answer her. He reached for his wine glass, but his hand was shaking so badly that he knocked it over. Red wine spilled across the pristine white tablecloth, spreading like a bloodstain toward his mother's plate. Nobody moved to clean it up. My father cleared his throat. It is just a misunderstanding, son. You said you charmed them. You are the best sales director they have. This shark character probably just wants a better rate. You can handle it. Trey looked at our father, and I saw genuine terror in his eyes. It was not just the fear of losing a job. It was something deeper, something darker. You do not understand, Dad, Trey whispered. I need that bonus. I need it now. Why do you need it now? I asked, speaking up from my corner table. My voice was calm, cutting through the panic. You have a salary, Trey. You have savings, right? You are the successful one. Losing a bonus hurts, but it should not be a catastrophe unless you are living beyond your means. Trey's head snapped toward me. His eyes were wide and manic. Shut up, Isaiah. You do not know what you are talking about. I leaned back in my metal chair, crossing my arms. I knew exactly what I was talking about. My private investigator, Marcus, had sent me Trey's full financial dossier 2 days ago. I knew about the online poker addiction. I knew about the $80,000 in credit card debt. And I knew about the loan sharks. Trey had borrowed $50,000 from some very dangerous people to cover his losses on a failed crypto investment earlier this year. The loan was coming due on Tuesday. The bonus from the NGL deal was not just for a luxury car, it was to keep his kneecaps intact. Without that contract, he was a dead man walking. Trey stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back. I need air, he said, gasping. He stumbled toward the back door, fumbling with the latch. He practically fell out onto the patio into the cold night air. My mother stood up to follow him, but my father stopped her. Let him be, Viola. He needs to think. He is under a lot of pressure. He is playing in the big leagues now. This is just part of the game. Brittany looked at the spilled wine on the table, and then at me. Her expression was one of disgust, as if I had somehow caused the phone call with my mind. "This is your fault," she spat. "You brought bad energy into this house. Ever since you walked in with those muddy boots, everything has gone wrong." I looked at her and laughed. A low, dry laugh. "My boots did not suspend his contract, Brittany," I said. "His arrogance did." I stood up and walked over to the main table. I picked up the pitcher of water and poured myself a fresh glass. My parents looked at me as if I were a stranger. They were terrified. Their retirement plan, their golden ticket to the Bahamas, was disintegrating before their eyes. I took a sip of water and looked out the sliding glass door. I could see Trey pacing back and forth on the patio, holding his head in his hands. He was pulling at his hair, muttering to himself. He was trying to figure out how to fix a problem that was unfixable because he didn't even know who he was fighting. He thought he was fighting a corporate bureaucracy. He thought he was fighting bad luck. He had no idea that the man holding the pen, the man who had just crushed his world with a single text message to a vice president, was standing 10 feet away, wearing a flannel shirt and watching him with cold, indifferent eyes. My phone buzzed in my pocket again. I pulled it out. It was Sarah. "Update, the MedTech CEO just called back. He is begging for a meeting on Monday. He says he will fire the sales director immediately if it helps." "What is your move, boss?" I looked at Trey outside, shivering in his suit. I looked at my father, who was staring at the wine stain on the tablecloth, looking old and defeated. I typed a reply. "Tell him the meeting is on, but I want the sales director there. I want him to look me in the eye when I sign the papers, or when I shred them." I put the phone back in my pocket. The appetizer was over. The main course had been served, but dessert was going to be the sweetest part of all. I sat back down at my card table and picked up my plastic fork. "Pass the potatoes, please," I said into the silence. I suddenly have quite an appetite. The sliding glass door rattled as Trey stumbled back into the dining room. The cold night air clung to his suit, and his face was a mask of sheer panic. The arrogance that had defined him for the last 3 hours had evaporated, leaving behind a trembling child who looked like he was about to be sick. My mother Viola was on him in an instant. She rushed over, avoiding the puddle of spilled wine, and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. "Oh, my poor baby," she cooed, guiding him back to his chair as if he were a wounded soldier returning from war. "Sit down, Trey. Breathe. It is going to be okay. Mama is here." Trey collapsed into the chair, his head in his hands. "I am dead, Mom," he whispered, his voice shaking. $50 million. If I lose this contract, Sterling is going to blacklist me. I will lose the bonus. I will lose the car. I will lose everything." My father Otis stood over him, his face set in a grim line of denial. He refused to accept what we had just heard. In his mind, Trey was the golden boy, and golden boys did not fail. The world must be wrong. The system must be broken. But his son could not be at fault. "Now you listen to me, son," Otis said, his voice booming with forced confidence. "This is just a misunderstanding. Corporations make mistakes all the time. Someone probably filed the wrong paperwork or entered the wrong code in the computer. There is no way they would suspend a contract because of attitude. You are the best sales director MedTech has ever seen. You are charming. You are persuasive. You are a winner." Trey looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "But Sterling said the CEO flagged it personally, Dad. He said, 'The shark thinks I am a liability.'" Otis waved his hand dismissively. "This shark character probably does not even know who you are. He is listening to some jealous middle manager who wants to sabotage you. You call them on Monday morning and you demand a meeting. You walk in there and you show them who Trey Jackson is. You demand respect." I sat in my corner at the card table watching this delusion unfold. It was fascinating in a tragic sort of way. My father was advising Trey to do the exact thing that had gotten him into this mess. He was telling him to double down on the arrogance. He was telling him to demand respect instead of earning it. They still did not get it. They thought business was about bluster and intimidation. They did not understand that at the level I operated, at business was about relationships and integrity. I cleared my throat. The sound was soft, but in the hysterical room, it cut through the noise. Actually, Dad, I said, keeping my voice neutral, I do not think demanding anything is the right move here. 3 heads snapped toward me. The look of disdain on their faces was identical. It was as if the furniture had started talking. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the flimsy card table. NGL is a logistics company, I continued. I know a little bit about that industry. Companies like that operate on precision and trust. If they flag the contract because of attitude, it means they felt disrespected. They do not care how good your product is if they do not like the person selling it. Trey narrowed his eyes. What are you talking about, Isaiah? I am saying that maybe there was a moment where you pushed too hard, I said. Maybe you treated a receptionist poorly. Maybe you were late to a meeting. Maybe you made a joke that did not land. NGL has a very specific corporate culture. They value humility. Perhaps you should reflect on how you treat people you consider beneath you, like waitstaff or drivers. I let the words hang in the air. I was giving him a lifeline. I was giving him the answer key to the test. If he had just paused and thought about it, he might have realized that his behavior toward me all night was exactly the kind of behavior that would get him fired. But self-reflection is a skill Trey had never learned. Brittany slammed her wine glass down on the table. The sound made Prince the poodle bark from under the table. She turned her body completely toward me, her eyes flashing with venom. "Oh my God, are you serious right now?" she shrieked. "Are you actually trying to give business advice to a director?" She looked at Trey, and then back at me, laughing incredulously. "This is Rich. The guy who drives a frozen food truck is lecturing us on corporate culture. Do you even know what a contract looks like, Isaiah? Have you ever signed anything other than a delivery receipt for a box of fish sticks?" I held her gaze calmly. I was not intimidated by her fake bag or her sharp tongue. I signed a few things, I said simply. Brittany rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. "You drive a truck," she spat. "You move boxes from point A to point B. You are manual labor. Trey deals with strategy. He deals with millions of dollars. He deals with executives. You deal with loading docks and sweaty men. So please, for the love of God, shut up and let the adults handle this." My father nodded in agreement. "She is right, Isaiah. You are out of your depth. You do not understand high-stakes negotiation. Stick to what you know. Go check that generator like I asked you. You are just adding noise to a crisis." Trey let out a long sigh, rubbing his temples. "He is just jealous, Dad. He sees me struggling and he wants to kick me while I am down. He wants me to fail so he does not feel so bad about his own mediocre life." I looked at them. I looked at the 3 of them united in their ignorance. They were drowning, and I had just thrown them a life preserver, but they were too busy mocking the material of the rope to grab it. "Fine," I said, leaning back in my metal chair. "Do it your way. Demand respect. See how far that gets you with the shark." Just then my phone buzzed in my pocket again. It was a long, sustained vibration indicating a high-priority message. I slipped it out of my pocket, keeping it below the table line. The screen lit up with a text from Sarah. "Boss, Richard Sterling is panicking. He has called the main switchboard 6 times in the last 10 minutes. He is begging for a meeting with you on Monday morning. He says he will fly anywhere. He says he will do anything to save the contract. He sounds desperate. How do you want to proceed?" I looked at Trey. He was now huddled with my parents, listening to my father draft a script for what he should say on Monday. They were plotting a war they had already lost. I looked at the text message again. I could end it right now. I could text Sarah to cancel the contract permanently. I could text her to tell Sterling that his sales director was a fraud. I could destroy Trey's career before the pumpkin pie was served. But that was too easy. That was too quick. I wanted them to sweat. I wanted them to walk into that meeting on Monday morning thinking they still had a chance. I wanted Trey to put on his best suit and his most arrogant smile and walk into my office only to realize that the man sitting behind the desk was the brother he had called a beggar. I typed my reply to Sarah, slowly savoring every keystroke. Let him wait. Tell him I will see him at 9 a.m. Monday. But tell him to bring the entire sales team, especially the director. And Sarah, make sure the security team knows to let a silver Mercedes park in the VIP lot. I want him to feel special before the fall. I hit send. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and picked up my plastic fork. The tension in the room was still high, but for me the night had transformed. It was no longer a family dinner where I was the outcast. It was a waiting game. I looked over at Brittany, who was whispering something in Trey's ear, stroking his arm. She was betting on the wrong horse. She thought she was dating a vice president. By Monday afternoon, she would be dating an unemployed man with a mountain of debt. I wondered if she would stick around when the leased Mercedes was repossessed. I looked at her fake Hermes bag and decided the answer was no. Pass the cranberry sauce, I said, breaking the silence. They ignored me. But that was okay. I was used to being ignored. It is amazing what you can accomplish when no one is watching you. The atmosphere in the dining room had shifted from celebration to a funeral wake. Trey was staring at his reflection in the spilled wine, his face a mask of defeat, while my parents whispered fiercely to each other, trying to concoct a plan to save face. But Brittany was not used to losing. She was a woman who had glided through life on the coattails of her father's credit card, and she believed there was no problem that could not be solved by knowing the right people. She looked at Trey's slumped shoulders and rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, exasperated sigh that demanded everyone's attention. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Trey, stop pouting," she said, snapping her fingers in front of his face. "You are acting like this is the end of the world. It is just a contract dispute. You are making a mountain out of a molehill." Trey looked up at her, his eyes hollow. "You do not understand Brittany." Sterling was serious. "If I do not fix this by Monday, I am finished." Brittany laughed, and it was a sharp, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Sterling is just a middle manager in a cheap suit," she said dismissively. "He is scared. But you know who isn't scared? My father." My mother perked up instantly. "Mr. Henderson." "Oh, Brittany, do you think your father could help? I hear he is very connected in the business world." Brittany preened, smoothing her hair. "Connected is an understatement, Viola. My daddy owns Henderson Haulage. He has a fleet of 50 trucks. He knows everyone in the Atlanta logistics scene. He plays golf with senators. He has lunch with bank presidents. If anyone can get through to this Nexus Global Logistics company, it is him." She reached into her fake Hermes bag and pulled out her phone. Her nails clicked against the screen as she dialed. I watched from my corner table, taking a slow sip of lukewarm tea. Henderson Haulage. I knew the name. They were a third-tier regional carrier. We used them occasionally for overflow runs on non-critical routes. They were small fish, guppies swimming in an ocean of sharks. But to Brittany and my family, her father was a titan. "I will call him right now," she announced, holding the phone up like a scepter. "He will make one phone call to his friends at NGL, and this whole misunderstanding will be cleared up before dessert. Watch and learn, Isaiah. This is how real power works." She put the phone on speaker and set it in the center of the table. We all listened to the ringing tone. My father leaned forward, hope reigniting in his eyes. Trey sat up straighter, adjusting his tie as if preparing to be saved. "Hello," a gruff voice answered on the third ring. "Brittany, is that you? Happy Thanksgiving, princess." "Hi, Daddy." Brittany cooed, her voice dropping into a sickeningly sweet register. "Happy Thanksgiving. I am so sorry to bother you during the game, but we have a tiny little emergency here at Trey's house." "What is wrong?" her father asked, his voice tightening. "Is it the car? Did Trey crash the Mercedes?" "No, nothing like that." Brittany laughed. "It is a work thing. Trey is having a little trouble with a contract at MedTech. Some logistics company is being difficult and threatening to pull a deal. We were hoping you could use your connections to smooth things over." "You know, Call in a favor. Her father let out a relieved sigh. Is that all? Sure, honey. Who is the carrier? Is it FedEx? Or maybe Old Dominion? I know the regional managers at both. No, it is a company called Nexus Global Logistics, Brittany said confidently. NGL. Trey said their CEO is being difficult about. She didn't get to finish the sentence. The moment the words Nexus Global Logistics left her mouth, her father made a sound that I can only describe as a strangled yelp. It was the sound of a man who had just realized he was standing on a landmine. Stop! Mr. Henderson shouted through the speaker. Brittany, are you telling me Trey is in a dispute with NGL? Yes, Daddy, Brittany said, confused by his tone. That is what I said. We just need you to call them, and are you out of your mind? Her father roared. His voice was no longer warm or indulgent. It was terrified. Brittany listened to me very carefully. Do not mess with NGL. Do not call them. Do not email them. And for the love of God, do not mention my name in the same sentence as that company. Brittany blinked, her confidence faltering. But Daddy, why? You said you knew everyone. You said you were a big player. I am a big player in Atlanta, Mr. Henderson snapped. But NGL is not Atlanta, Brittany. NGL is global. They own the supply chain. If I annoy them, they could crush my business in a week. They could blacklist my trucks from every major port on the East Coast. We would be bankrupt by Christmas. The room went deadly silent. My father's mouth hung open. Trey looked like he was going to vomit. But surely you can talk to their CEO. Brittany pleaded, her voice rising in desperation. Trey said his name is the Shark or something. Just call him. Her father laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Call him. Brittany, nobody calls the Shark. Nobody even knows who he is. He is a ghost. In the industry, we do not even speak his full name. We just know the initials on the contracts. IJ. IJ. The letters hung in the air. That man is a phantom. Mr. Henderson continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. He came out of nowhere 5 years ago and bought up half the cold chain capacity in the country. He does not go to charity galas. He does not do interviews. He just acquires companies and destroys anyone who lacks integrity. If Trey is on his bad side, tell him to pack his desk. There is no fixing it. Now I have to go. I need to make sure none of my drivers are currently under contract with NGL. I cannot afford the blowback. Goodbye, Brittany. The line clicked dead. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. The only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator and the soft clink of my teacup as I set it back down on the saucer. IJ. My initials. Isaiah Jackson. I looked around the room, waiting for the realization to hit them. I waited for them to look at me and connect the dots. My name was Isaiah. My last name was Jackson. I worked in logistics. I had just told them I knew the industry. The puzzle pieces were massive and they were lying right there on the table. But they didn't see it. Their prejudice was so deep, their image of me as a failure was so cemented in their minds that the truth simply bounced off them. To them, I was Isaiah, the truck driver. The idea that I could be the terrifying IJ that Mr. Henderson spoke of was not just impossible, it was inconceivable. It would be like suspecting the family cat of being a nuclear physicist. Trey broke the silence with a moan of despair. IJ, he whispered. Even Henderson is afraid of him. Who is this guy? He sounds like a monster. Brittany snatched her phone off the table, her face flushed with embarrassment. Well, my dad is just being cautious, she said defensively. He has a lot to lose. He is just protecting his assets. My father shook his head slowly. If Henderson will not touch it, then it must be bad. This IJ character sounds like a tyrant, a man with no soul. Probably some old billionaire sitting in a tower in New York enjoying destroying young men's careers. I picked up my spoon and stirred the dregs of my tea. A small smile touched the corners of my lips. A tyrant, a monster, a ghost. I had been called many things in boardrooms, but hearing my own family describe my alter ego with such fear was deeply satisfying. He does sound formidable, I said, speaking from the shadows of my corner. A man who values integrity above all else. Maybe he is not a monster, Dad. Maybe he just has high standards. Brittany whipped around to face me, needing a target for her humiliation. Oh, shut up, Isaiah. What would you know about standards? You heard my dad. This is a global mogul. You probably do not even know what those words mean. And do not sit there looking smug. Just because my dad cannot fix it does not mean Trey is finished. I am finished, Trey whispered, staring at his hands. Sterling gave me a deadline. Monday morning. If I do not have a meeting set up, I am fired. And now we know nobody can get to this guy. I looked at my watch. It was getting late. The charade had gone on long enough, but I wasn't ready to end it. I wanted them to suffer through the weekend. I wanted them to feel the full weight of their helplessness. Actually, I said, standing up and brushing crumbs from my flannel shirt, I might know a guy. They all looked at me, not with hope, but with annoyance. You know a guy, Brittany scoffed. Who? Your shift supervisor at the warehouse. No, I said, walking over to the main table. I know someone who works in the executive office at NGL. I met him on a delivery route once. Trey looked up, his eyes narrowing. You are lying. You are just trying to make yourself look important because Brittany's dad embarrassed you. I shrugged. Believe what you want, Trey, but I could probably send a text. See if I can get you that meeting on Monday. My mother let out a harsh laugh. Oh, Isaiah, stop it. This is not the time for your fantasies. We are dealing with a crisis and you are playing make-believe. Go sit down. I looked at my mother. She was dismissing the only lifeline her golden boy had because it came from the hand of the son she didn't respect. Okay, Mom, I said. I will sit down. I wouldn't want to overstep. I walked back to my card table and sat down. I pulled out my phone and opened my messages. I saw the text draft to Sarah that I hadn't sent yet, the one instructing her to set up the meeting. I deleted it. If they wanted to suffer, I would let them suffer. I would let Trey sweat for 2 more days. I would let him spend the entire weekend terrified of the mysterious IJ. And when Monday came, I would not just be a name on a contract. I would be the reckoning they never saw coming. Brittany poured herself another glass of wine, her hand shaking slightly. IJ, she muttered under her breath. What kind of initials are those anyway? Probably stands for something pretentious. I took a sip of my tea and whispered into the cup. Isaiah Jackson. But nobody heard me. And even if they had, they wouldn't have believed it. The pumpkin pie sat in the center of the table, uncut and cold. The whipped cream had started to melt into a sad white puddle, which was a perfect metaphor for the mood in the room. Trey had stopped pacing, but the energy coming off him was radioactive. He was vibrating with a toxic mix of fear and aggression, needing a target for his panic. He could not yell at his boss. He could not yell at the mysterious CEO of Nexus Global Logistics, and he certainly could not yell at himself. So his eyes landed on the only person in the room he felt superior to. Me. It started with a low growl from his throat. It is you, he whispered. I looked up from my empty plate. Excuse me. It is you, Trey said louder this time, his voice cracking with hysteria. Ever since you walked through that door, everything has gone to hell. You brought this bad energy in here, Isaiah. You and your muddy boots and your sad stories about driving trucks. You are a black cloud. Brittany nodded eagerly, grasping at the explanation. He is right. The vibe was perfect before you got here. We were celebrating. We were happy. Then you walked in looking like a homeless person and suddenly, Trey loses his contract. That is not a coincidence. That is negative manifestation. I looked at them in disbelief. They were serious. They were actually blaming a corporate contract dispute on my choice of footwear. You cannot be serious, I said calmly. Trey, you lost the contract because you were arrogant. You treated the client like they were beneath you. Do not blame me for your lack of professionalism. Trey slammed his fist onto the table, making the silverware jump. Do not talk to me about professionalism, he screamed. You drive a truck, Isaiah. You do not know the first thing about the corporate world. You are a jinx. You have always been a jinx. Mom remembers. Tell him, Mom. Tell him how every time he comes around something breaks. My mother Viola looked down at her hands, twisting her napkin. She did not want to agree, but she did not want to upset her golden boy when he was in crisis. Well, she said softly, it is true that things are usually lighter when it is just us, Trey. Isaiah does have a tendency to bring a certain heaviness to the room. Maybe it is the struggle. Poverty does have a smell, Trey. The betrayal stung, but I did not show it. Poverty had a smell, she said. It was funny because the only thing I smelled in that room was desperation and cheap perfume. Trey seized on her words. See, Mom agrees. You are a curse, Isaiah. You are a walking disaster. I was about to become a vice president. I was about to be rich. And then you showed up and the universe decided to punish me for associating with a loser. He stood up and pointed a shaking finger at my face. You need to leave, right now. I cannot fix this while you are sitting there judging me with your self-righteous silence. Get out of my house. I looked at my father Otis. He was the patriarch. He was the man who had taught me to shake hands firmly and look a man in the eye. I waited for him to tell Trey to sit down. I waited for him to defend his son. Otis slowly pushed his chair back and stood up. He adjusted his blazer and looked at me with cold, hard eyes. There was no love in them, only calculation. He had done the math. Trey was the investment. I was the sunk cost. You heard your brother Isaiah. My father said, his voice like gravel. I stared at him. You are kicking me out, Dad. On Thanksgiving. This dinner is for winners, Isaiah Otis said without stuttering. It is for people who contribute, people who have a future. We are trying to solve a crisis here, and quite frankly, looking at you is just a reminder of what happens when you do not have ambition. You are a distraction. He pointed toward the front door. Go on, get your bag. Go back to your truck. Go sleep in a rest stop or wherever it is you people sleep. When you get a real job, when you can come to this table wearing a suit and bringing good news, then you can come back. Until then, do not embarrass us anymore. The room was silent. Brittany smirked, taking a sip of her wine. Trey looked vindicated, his chest puffing out, as if he had just defeated a dragon instead of bullying his brother. My mother refused to meet my eyes. I slowly pushed my metal chair back. The sound of the legs scraping against the floor was loud and final. I stood up to my full height. I was taller than Trey. I was broader than my father. I had spent the last 5 years building things while they spent their time pretending. I walked over to the corner and picked up my duffel bag. I slung it over my shoulder. I looked at the table one last time. I looked at the fake luxury, the rented crystal, and the hollow people. I brushed a speck of invisible dust from my flannel sleeve. Fine, I said, my voice steady and deep. I will leave. I would hate to ruin your winning streak. I turned to Trey. You have until Monday at 9 a.m. to fix your mess. Good luck with that. Then I turned to my father. And Dad, you said this table is for people who contribute. You might want to check who has been paying for Grandma's nursing home for the last 3 years, because it certainly wasn't Trey. My father frowned, confused. What are you talking about? The state pays for that. I just smiled, a cold, knowing smile. Keep telling yourself that. I walked to the front door. My hand touched the cold brass handle. I paused and looked back at them. They were watching me, waiting for me to disappear so they could go back to their delusion. One last thing I said. You kicked me out because you think I am worthless. You think I am a failure. But remember this moment. Because the next time you see me, the dynamic is going to be very different. And when you realize what you have done when you come to me asking for help, remember that I offered you a lifeline, and you slapped it away. I opened the door, letting the night air rush in. When you need me, and you will need me, The price is not going to be cheap. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me. The latch clicked. It was the sound of a bridge burning. I walked down the driveway into the darkness toward the street where Trey had banished my truck. But I did not go to my truck. I stood on the curb and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number. "Bring the car around," I said. "I am done here." I stood there in the cold waiting. Inside, they were probably toasting to my departure. They were probably telling themselves that with the jinx gone, their luck would turn. They had no idea that the only luck they had left was walking away from them down the pavement, and Monday morning was coming like a freight train. I stepped off the porch and listened to the heavy thud of the front door closing behind me. The sound was final, like the closing of a vault. The November air was biting, cutting through my flannel shirt, but I did not zip up my jacket. I welcomed the cold. It felt clean. It felt real. Unlike the suffocating heat of that dining room, the cold air didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. I walked down the driveway, my boots crunching on the gravel. I could feel their eyes burning into my back through the living room window. They were probably watching to make sure I actually left, to make sure the stain on their perfect Thanksgiving was finally removed. I reached the end of the driveway where the manicured lawn met the street. I was supposed to turn left, walk 2 blocks to the dumpster behind the community center, and retrieve my old truck. That was the script they had written for me. The failure walks away into the dark while the winners finish their wine. But I didn't turn left. I stood right there at the curb directly in front of the house and waited. I checked my watch. My driver was always punctual. Suddenly, the darkness of the suburban street was shattered by blinding white light. Twin beams of high-intensity LED headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating the oak trees and the perfectly trimmed hedges. A low hum, powerful and smooth, vibrated in the air. It wasn't the rattle of a delivery truck. It was the purr of a 12-cylinder engine designed for heads of state. A limousine pulled up to the curb. It was not just a rental limo for prom night. It was a stretched Mercedes Maybach, armored and jet black with tinted windows so dark they looked like oil. Flags were mounted on the front fenders, not national flags, but the corporate pennants of Nexus Global Logistics. It glided to a stop right where Trey had forbidden me to park, its massive frame dominating the entire front of the house. Behind me, I heard the front door fly open. The curiosity was too much for them. My family, who had just banished me, came spilling out onto the porch like moths drawn to a flame. Trey was in the lead, holding his wine glass. Brittany was right behind him, clutching her fake bag. My parents followed, squinting into the bright lights. "What is that?" Brittany gasped, her voice carrying over the lawn. "Is that a Maybach?" Trey's eyes went wide. The fear that had been consuming him vanished, replaced instantly by a surge of adrenaline and ego. He looked at the car, then at me standing near it, and his mind made a connection that was purely delusional but entirely consistent with his narcissism. "It is," Sterling Trey shouted, stumbling down the porch steps. "He sent a car. I knew it. I knew he wouldn't fire me. He sent a car to take me to a private meeting. This is how they do it in the big leagues." He ran past me, actually bumping my shoulder in his haste. He didn't even look at me. In his mind, I was invisible. I was just part of the scenery. He stopped right in front of the limousine, straightening his tie and smoothing his hair. He put on his best sales smile, the one he used to charm receptionists and weak managers. "Mom." Dad looked, Trey called back over his shoulder. "This is it. This is the VIP treatment. Get your cameras ready." The rear passenger door did not open. Instead, the front doors opened in unison. 2 men stepped out. They were not chauffeurs. They were dressed in bespoke charcoal suits that cost more than Trey's entire wardrobe. One was older, with silver hair and a face carved from granite. That was Marcus, my general counsel, and one of the most feared litigators in Washington. The other was younger, sharp-eyed, and holding a tablet. That was David, my chief operating officer. They looked serious. The air around them crackled with urgency. They ignored Trey completely and scanned the area, their eyes searching the shadows. Trey stepped forward, extending his hand. "Gentlemen," he boomed, his voice oozing charm. "You must be from NGL. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the gesture. I assume Mr. Sterling arranged this transport. I am ready to go. My bags are inside, but we can... Marcus looked at Trey for the first time. He looked at the extended hand, then up at Trey's eager face. His expression was one of mild annoyance, like he had stepped in gum. He did not shake Trey's hand. He simply looked past him. "We are looking for Mr. Jackson," Marcus said, his voice deep and authoritative. "We have a code red situation involving the Federal Emergency Management Agency. We need a signature immediately for the airlift authorization." Trey laughed a nervous, excited sound. "Code red. I love it. You guys are intense." "Yes, I am Mr. Jackson. I am Trey Jackson. I am the one you are looking for. I am the lead on the medtech contract. I assume that is what this is about, the urgent signature for the deal." David, my COO, frowned. He looked down at his tablet, then back at Trey. He looked confused. "Medtech. We are not here for a pharmaceutical sales contract. We are here for the chairman. The White House is on hold." Trey blinked. The White House. Wow. Sterling really pulled out all the stops. "Okay, I get it. This is a test. You want to see if I can handle the pressure." "Yes, I am the chairman of the deal. I am ready to sign. Let's do this." Brittany ran down the steps, her heels clicking on the pavement. She hooked her arm through Trey's, beaming at the two executives. "And I am his partner. I will be accompanying him. I assume there is champagne in the back." My parents were standing on the lawn clutching each other. My mother was crying tears of joy. "I told you, Otis," she sobbed. "I told you he was special. Look at that car. My boy is important." I stood in the shadows, leaning against the trunk of the massive oak tree near the curb. I watched the circus unfold. I watched my brother try to claim a throne he hadn't built. I watched him try to steal a moment that wasn't his. It was the ultimate act of hubris. He was so convinced of his own magnificence that he couldn't hear what the men were actually saying. They were talking about airlifts and federal agencies. He was hearing bonus checks and promotions. Marcus finally lost his patience. He took a step closer to Trey, his physical presence intimidating. "Sir, step aside," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a growl. "We are not Uber drivers. We are not here for a party. We are looking for Isaiah Jackson. Our GPS tracker places him at this location." Trey froze. The smile wavered. "Isaiah." He turned slowly and looked at me. I was still standing there, arms crossed over my flannel shirt, my face hidden in the shadows of the tree. "Why would you want him?" Trey scoffed, pointing a thumb over his shoulder. "That is just my brother. He is a truck driver. He was just leaving. You probably pinged his phone by mistake. He delivers for some low-level carrier." David looked up from his tablet. He looked at Trey, then followed Trey's finger to where I was standing. His eyes locked onto me. The tension in his shoulders instantly evaporated. He tapped Marcus on the arm. "Sir David said, 'Target acquired. He is right there.'" The two men in suits immediately turned their backs on Trey. They walked past him as if he were a traffic cone. They walked past Brittany, who was still smiling her frozen pageant smile. They walked straight toward the man in the muddy boots. Trey spun around. "Hey, wait a minute. You are making a mistake. That is the wrong Jackson. He is nobody. He is a failure. I am the one with the MBA. I am the director." Marcus stopped. He turned his head slowly and looked at Trey with a look of absolute withering pity. "Sir Marcus," said, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "In our world, an MBA gets you a job interview. But the man standing behind you owns the company that prints the paychecks. I suggest you show some respect." Trey's mouth fell open. My parents gasped. The two executives reached me. They didn't grab me. They didn't arrest me. They stopped 3 feet away and bowed their heads slightly. It was a gesture of deference, a gesture of loyalty. "Mr. Chairman," Marcus said, his tone shifting to one of professional urgency, "we apologize for the intrusion on your holiday. But the hurricane situation has escalated. The President has requested immediate deployment of the C-5 Galaxy fleet. We cannot move the birds without your biometric authorization." I stepped out of the shadows. The light from the headlights hit my face. I wasn't smiling anymore. I looked at Marcus, then at David. Does the president have the logistics plan I drafted? I asked, my voice changing. Gone was the soft-spoken brother. In his place was the CEO. My voice was crisp, commanding, and authoritative. Yes, sir, David replied. He has reviewed it. He is waiting for your green light. I nodded. Open the car. Get me a secure line. Trey stood frozen on the driveway. He looked from me to the car, then back to me. His brain was trying to process the data, but it was crashing. The brother he had mocked. The brother he had given a $50 gift card. The brother he had called a beggar. Isaiah Trey whispered, his voice trembling. What is going on? Who are these people? I paused with my hand on the door handle of the limousine. I turned slowly to face them. My family. The people who had judged me by my cover and never bothered to read the book. I told you, Trey. I said, my voice cold and hard. I told you that when you needed me, the price would not be cheap. You thought I drove the truck. You never asked who owned the road. I signaled David. He opened the rear door. I stepped into the plush leather interior of the mobile command center. I sat down, and the heavy door thudded shut, sealing me in a world of silence and power, leaving my family standing in the cold, staring at a reality they could no longer deny. The engine of the armored Maybach hummed with a low vibration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the suburban driveway. Trey stood frozen near the rear fender, his hands still half extended in a greeting that nobody wanted to accept. He looked like a man who had walked onto a stage expecting applause only to find himself in an empty theater. He blinked rapidly, trying to process the scene before him. Two men in suits worth more than his car had just walked past him as if he were invisible. They had walked past the golden boy, the vice president, hopeful, the family success story, and they were walking with purpose toward the darkness at the edge of the lawn where the family failure was standing in the cold. Hey, wait a minute, Trey stammered, his voice pitching up an octave. You guys are making a mistake. Serious mistake. That is just Isaiah. He drives a truck. He is nobody. I am the one you want. I am the director. He took a step to follow them, reaching out to grab the arm of the older man, Marcus. It was a fatal error in judgment. Before Trey's fingers could even graze the fabric of the suit, Marcus stopped and turned. He did not raise his voice. He did not look angry. He looked at Trey with the kind of cold, professional detachment a surgeon uses before cutting out a tumor. Do not touch me, Marcus said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that froze Trey in his tracks. And do not interrupt official company business. If you take one more step toward the chairman, I will have the security detail remove you from the premises. And I promise you, they will not be gentle. Trey recoiled as if he had been slapped. Chairman? The word hung in the cold night air like a cloud of vapor. He looked at our father Otis, who was standing on the porch, his mouth slightly open, his eyes darting back and forth between the limousine and me. Chairman Otis whispered to himself, "Who is the chairman?" The two executives reached the spot where I was leaning against the rough bark of the oak tree. I had not moved. I had not waved. I simply watched them approach. David, the chief operating officer, stopped 3 feet in front of me. He stood at attention, his posture rigid, his face serious. He held a secure satellite phone in his hand, the screen glowing with an encrypted connection status. "Good evening, Mr. Jackson," David said. "We apologize for the dramatic entrance, sir, but the timeline has accelerated. The hurricane has shifted course, and FEMA has declared a state of emergency for the entire coastal region. The national stockpile of vaccines needs to be moved within the next 4 hours, or we risk losing the entire inventory to floodwaters." I looked at David. I saw the stress in his eyes. This was not a drill. This was $50 million of life-saving medicine on the line. "The White House is on line 1, Marcus added, stepping up beside him. "The Chief of Staff is asking for you personally. They need authorization to use our private airfield in Florida as a staging ground for the National Guard. They cannot land military transports without your signature on the liability waiver." I slowly peeled my back away from the tree. The time for hiding was over. The time for pretending to be the simple truck driver was done. I reached up and took off my old faded baseball cap. I ran a hand through my hair and straightened my spine. I seemed to grow 2 inches in that moment, shedding the slump of the beaten-down brother and assuming the stance of a man who commanded fleets. My family watched in stunned silence. They were witnessing a transformation they could not comprehend. It was like watching a stray cat turn into a lion right before their eyes. Brittany was standing on the bottom step of the porch, holding a glass of red wine that she had carried outside in her excitement. She was staring at me, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. She looked at my muddy boots. Then she looked at the deferential way the executives were treating me. The pieces of the puzzle finally slammed together in her mind. IJ, she whispered. Isaiah Jackson. Her hand went limp. The crystal wine glass slipped from her fingers. It fell in slow motion, tumbling through the air until it hit the pristine white concrete of the driveway. It shattered with a loud, sharp crash, the red wine exploding outward like a gunshot wound, splashing onto the hem of her white cashmere coat and staining Trey's polished shoes. Nobody moved to clean it up. Nobody even looked at it. "Give me the phone," I said, my voice dropping into the deep, resonant tone I used in boardrooms. David handed me the satellite phone immediately. I held it to my ear. "This is Jackson," I said. There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. I listened, my face impassive. "Yes, Mr. President. I understand the urgency," I said calmly. Behind me, I heard my mother, Viola, let out a strangled gasp. She grabbed Otis's arm to keep from falling over. The president. Her son, the truck driver, was talking to the President of the United States on a satellite phone in her driveway. "I am authorizing the use of the airfield effective immediately." I continued staring straight ahead into the darkness. "But I want to guarantee that my ground crews are given priority clearance for the vaccine transport. We have our own protocols for cold chain integrity, and I do not want military personnel messing with the temperature controls. Do we have an agreement?" I paused again, listening. "Good," I said. "I will have my general counsel send over the digital keys. Get those birds in the air. We will handle the logistics on the ground." "Thank you, sir." I handed the phone back to David. He took it and immediately began typing on his tablet, executing the commands I had just issued. Marcus stepped closer, holding out a tablet with a stylus. "We just need the biometric signature for the fleet activation, sir. And there is one more thing. The medtech contract dispute." I froze. I looked at Marcus, then I looked past him to where Trey was standing. Trey looked like a ghost. His face was pale, his eyes were glassy. He was trembling violently, not from the cold, but from the sheer terror of realization. He had heard every word. He had heard me command the movement of armies and medicine. He had heard me negotiate with the White House. And now he heard the name of his own company. "What about MedTech?" I asked, keeping my eyes locked on my brother. Marcus glanced at Trey with disdain. "Richard Sterling is on line 2 holding for you. He says he is willing to terminate his sales director immediately if it means saving the deal. He is asking if you want to deliver the news personally or if you want us to handle the termination paperwork." The silence on the driveway was absolute. Even the crickets seemed to stop chirping. Trey took a stumbling step forward, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Isaiah," he choked out. "Please." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had mocked me for 5 years. I looked at the man who had thrown a $50 gift card at my feet an hour ago. I looked at the man who had tried to kick me out of his house because I didn't fit his image of success. I took the tablet from Marcus. I looked at the digital document. It was the authorization to suspend all business with MedTech Solutions. I signed my name. It was a fluid, practiced motion. "Isaiah Jackson." I handed the tablet back to Marcus. "Tell Sterling I will handle it," I said. "Tell him the meeting is still on for Monday at 9 a.m. I want to look him in the eye when I reshape his company." "Yes, Mr. Chairman," Marcus said. I turned to David. "Open the door. We have work to do." David opened the rear door of the limousine wide. The interior light spilled out, revealing cream leather seats, a fully stocked bar, and banks of monitors glowing with maps and data. It was a mobile war room. I stepped toward the car. But before I got in, I stopped. I turned back one last time to look at my family. My father, Otis, looked old. The arrogance had drained out of him, leaving a confused elderly man who realized he had bet on the wrong horse. My mother was weeping silently, her hand over her mouth. Brittany was staring at the wine stain on her coat, realizing that her fake Hermes bag was now the least of her problems. And Trey. Trey was on his knees. He had literally fallen to his knees on the gravel. He was looking up at me with the eyes of a man who sees the executioner raising the axe. "Isaiah, wait!" He pleaded, his voice a broken whisper. "I didn't know. How could I know? You never told us." I looked down at him. The muddy boots he had despised were now standing inches from his face. "I told you every day." "Trey," I said softly. "I told you with my hard work. I told you with my silence. I told you by showing up. You just never learned how to listen to anything that didn't sound like money." I got into the car. David closed the heavy door with a solid thud that shut out the cold, the wind, and the family that had never known me. As the limousine pulled away, gliding smoothly down the street, I did not look back. I picked up the phone to call the White House back. I had a job to do. And unlike Trey, I intended to finish it. The heavy door of the limousine remained open for just a moment longer. The interior light cast a long shadow across the gravel driveway, illuminating the stunned faces of the people who had raised me and the brother who had tormented me. I stood there with one hand on the roof of the car, looking down at them from the precipice of my real life. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the engine and the distant barking of a dog. Trey was the first to find his voice, but it was not the booming, confident voice of the sales director. It was a thin, strangled sound that barely made it past his lips. He took a stumbling step forward, his expensive dress shoes dragging in the dirt. "Chairman," he whispered. The word sounded foreign in his mouth. "You. But that is impossible. You are a driver. I saw your truck. It is a rusted piece of junk. You wear flannel. You have mud on your boots. Drivers do not own companies, Isaiah. Drivers do not talk to the president." He looked at my father, Otis, for confirmation. But Otis was staring at the corporate flags on the fender of the car with a look of dawning horror. The reality was crashing down on them too fast for them to process. Marcus, who was standing by the open door holding my briefcase, stepped forward. He adjusted his silk tie and looked at Trey with the kind of professional disdain usually reserved for a chaotic courtroom defendant. "Let me clarify the corporate structure for you, Mr. Jackson, since you seem to be struggling with the organizational chart," Marcus said, his voice crisp and sharp. He gestured to the fleet of phantom trucks that existed in the ether of my empire. "Your brother does not drive a truck for a wage," Marcus continued. "He owns the fleet. Specifically, he owns 650 Class 8 semi-trucks. He owns 12 temperature-controlled distribution centers across North America. He owns 3 Boeing 747 cargo freighters that are currently being prepped for federal service." Marcus took a step closer to Trey, invading his personal space. "And most relevant to your current employment situation," Marcus added, "Mr. Jackson owns the proprietary cold chain technology that your company MedTech relies on. He is the one who decides whether your pharmaceuticals leave the loading dock or whether they rot in the warehouse. Without his trucks, your product is just expensive dust." Trey's knees gave way. He literally collapsed onto the grass beside the driveway. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and wet with tears. The arrogance was gone. The pride was gone. All that was left was the terrifying realization that he had spent years kicking the giant who held his life in his hands. "So it was you," Trey choked out. "The NGL contract. The shark." I stepped away from the car and walked back toward him. Just a few steps, enough to loom over him. "Yes, Trey," I said, my voice low and steady. "I am the shark. I am the ghost you were so afraid of." I looked at my parents. I looked at Brittany, who was shivering in her wine-stained coat. You asked why the contract was suspended, I said. You thought it was a mistake. You thought it was bad luck. But it was a choice. My choice. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the phone I had used to text Sarah. I flagged your file, Trey. Not because your price was too high, not because your product was bad. I flagged it because I do not do business with people who lack integrity. I do not sign contracts with men who belittle their family to impress strangers. I do not partner with men who throw gift cards at their brothers and call them beggars. Trey began to sob. It was an ugly sound. Isaiah, please. I did not know. If I had known who you were, I never would have. I cut him off. That is the point, Trey. You should have treated me with respect when you thought I was nobody. That is what character is. It is how you treat the people who can do nothing for you, and you failed that test every single time. I looked at my father, Otis. You told me this table was for winners, Dad, I said. You told me to come back when I had a real job. Well, I have a job. I employ 4,000 people. I move the economy. Is that real enough for you? Otis opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked old and small, standing there in the harsh light of the headlamps. I turned back to the car. Marcus held the door for me. The contract remains suspended, I said over my shoulder. And Trey, on Monday morning, do not bother coming to the meeting. I will not be there. I have a country to help. You can explain to Richard Sterling why the shark decided to eat you alive. I slid into the leather seat. Marcus closed the door with a solid thud that sounded like a gavel coming down. As the car pulled away, gliding smoothly into the night, I did not look back at the rearview mirror. I did not need to see their faces to know that they were pale. I did not need to see them to know that the silence I left behind was heavier than any words I could have spoken. The lesson had been delivered, and the tuition was everything they had. As I placed one foot inside the plush interior of the limousine, I paused. The warmth of the climate-controlled cabin was inviting me to leave this cold reality behind, but there was one loose end that remained untied. I could hear Trey weeping in the dirt, and I could feel the heavy gaze of my parents burning into my back, but my attention shifted past them. I looked toward the bottom of the porch steps where Brittany was standing. She was shivering violently in the night air. The red wine stain on her white cashmere coat had begun to dry, turning a dark, ugly purple that looked like a bruise on the fabric. But she was not looking at the stain. She was clutching that bright orange handbag against her chest, holding it tight like a shield that could protect her from the destruction falling around her. I stepped back out of the car, just for a moment. I adjusted my cuffs and walked toward her. The gravel crunched under my boots, the sound loud and ominous in the silence. Brittany's eyes went wide, and she took a step back, stumbling slightly in her heels. She looked at me with pure terror, as if I were a predator closing in on wounded prey. Brittany, I said, my voice smooth and calm. I almost forgot something. She did not speak. She just stared at me, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I pointed a finger at the orange bag she was crushing against her ribs. I noticed your bag earlier, I continued. It is a very convincing replica. The leather grain is almost perfect, and the hardware has a nice weight to it. Most people would never know the difference. But as I told you, my company handles the supply chain for the real thing. I know a counterfeit when I see one. Brittany flushed a deep crimson that rivaled the wine stain. She tried to hide the bag behind her back, but it was too late. The symbol of her status had become the evidence of her fraud. You mentioned your father earlier, I said, keeping my eyes locked on hers. Mr. Henderson. The man who owns Henderson Hollage. The man who thought he could use his connections to intimidate NGL. Brittany nodded mutely, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. You should give him a call, I said. Tell him that the container he has sitting in the holding yard at the Port of Savannah, container number 409, just got flagged by my customs compliance team about 20 minutes ago. Brittany's mouth fell open. Her grip on the bag loosened. Container, I asked. I do not know what you mean. I think you do, I said, my voice dropping lower. That container is registered to Henderson Haulage. The manifest says it is carrying auto parts. But my scanners picked up organic leather and metal hardware. It is full of handbags, Brittany. Thousands of them. All fake. All illegal. I took a step closer. In my industry, we call that trafficking in counterfeit goods. It is not just a fine, it is a federal crime. My team has already handed the evidence over to the authorities. By tomorrow morning, your father will not have to worry about being blacklisted by NGL. He is going to be too busy dealing with the FBI seizing his fleet and freezing his assets. Henderson Haulage is done. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She swayed on her feet. She knew exactly what her father did. She knew where the money for her car and her clothes came from. It came from the same corner cutting and dishonesty that she had displayed all night. And now, because she had tried to flaunt her power in front of the wrong man, she had brought the entire house of cards crashing down. "No," she whispered. "No, Daddy said it was safe. He said nobody checks the small containers." I smiled a cold, humorless smile. "I check everything, Brittany. That is why I am the chairman, and he is the one going to prison." Behind me, Trey pushed himself up from the ground. He saw the look on Brittany's face and the desperation in her eyes. He reached out to her, thinking they could find comfort in their shared misery. "Babe," Trey croaked, his voice hoarse. "Babe, I am so sorry. We can fix this. We can figure it out together." He took a step toward her, reaching for her hand. Brittany looked at him. She looked at the man she had dated for his title. She looked at the man she thought would make her a vice president's wife. Now he was unemployed, broke, and standing in the dirt. Oh. And because of him, her family empire was incinerated. Her face twisted into a mask of pure revulsion. She slapped his hand away. "Do not touch me!" she screamed. Trey recoiled, shocked. "Brittany, please! You did this!" she shrieked, backing away toward her car. "This is all your fault. If you hadn't been so arrogant, if you hadn't made us come here, none of this would have happened. You ruined me. You ruined my dad. You are a loser, Trey. A pathetic, broke loser." "But I love you." Trey stammered, tears mixing with the dirt on his face. "Love?" She laughed, a hysterical, manic sound. "I loved the promotion, Trey. I loved the Mercedes. I loved the idea of you. But look at you. You are nothing. And now, because of you, I have nothing." She turned and ran. She scrambled toward her car, her heels clicking frantically on the pavement. She fumbled with her keys, dropping them once before tearing the door open. She threw the fake Hermes bag into the passenger seat as if it burned her hands. "Brittany, wait!" Trey yelled, chasing after her. She slammed the door in his face. The engine roared to life. She threw the car into reverse, backing out of the driveway so fast she clipped the mailbox, knocking it into the street. She didn't stop. She shifted into drive and peeled away her tires, screeching, leaving burnt rubber marks on the asphalt. Trey stood alone in the driveway, illuminated by the red glow of her taillights as they disappeared around the corner. He was abandoned. The woman who had encouraged his bullying, the woman who had laughed at my boots, had left him the second the money ran out. I watched the scene with a sense of grim satisfaction. It was a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. Trey had surrounded himself with people who valued things over substance. Now he was left with neither. I turned back to the limousine. David and Marcus were waiting patiently by the open door. I looked at my brother one last time. He was standing with his arms hanging loosely at his sides, staring at the empty street. I got into the car. The leather seat was soft and supportive. The air smelled of clean linen and success. David closed the door, sealing me inside. The sound of the outside world, the sobbing of my mother, the wind in the trees, and the pathetic cries of my brother all vanished. "Let's go," I said to the driver. The limousine pulled away, gliding past my father, who was still standing on the porch, looking like a statue of regret. We moved smoothly down the street past the dark houses of the neighbors, who were sleeping soundly, unaware of the drama that had just played out. I picked up the satellite phone again. I had vaccines to move. I had a hurricane to fight. I had real problems to solve. Behind me, the house on the hill grew smaller and smaller until it was just a speck of light in the rearview mirror. A speck of light that was rapidly fading into the darkness, leaving my family to sit in the rubble of the reality they had created. The heavy door of the limousine was just inches from closing when a frantic hand grabbed the handle. It was my mother, Viola. She had run down the driveway in her heels, stumbling over the gravel that had cut into Trey's knees. Her face was flushed, not with shame, but with a terrifying desperation. She looked at the plush interior of the car, then at the executives waiting on my command, and finally at me. In a split second, she rearranged her features. The look of disgust she had worn all evening vanished, replaced by a wide, trembling smile that did not reach her panic-stricken eyes. "Oh, Isaiah, my baby," she gasped, tightening her grip on the door. "Do not go like this. We were just testing you. You know that, right?" She reached out and tried to take my hand, her fingers cold and clammy. "Mama knew you had it in you," she said, her voice pitching high and sweet. "I always told your father that Isaiah was the quiet genius. I was just being hard on you to push you. It was tough love, sweetheart. I wanted you to prove us wrong, and look at you. You did it. You are a chairman. My son the chairman." She gestured back toward the house where the cold turkey sat on the table. "Come back inside," she pleaded. "I will heat up the food. I will put you at the head of the table. You can tell us all about your airplanes and your company. We are a family, Isaiah. We forgive you for the secrecy. Just come inside and let Mama fix you a plate." I looked at her hand resting on my arm. It was the same hand that had waved me away when I asked for a loan 5 years ago. It was the same hand that had pointed me to the kids' table an hour ago. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my sleeve. I did not shove her. I simply disconnected her from me. "I am not hungry, Mom," I said, my voice soft but sounding like a final verdict. "But you have not eaten," she cried. "It is Thanksgiving. You cannot leave on an empty stomach." I looked her dead in the eye. "I am full," I said. "I have been eating your empty promises and your fake affection for 33 years. I have choked down every lie you told me about family loyalty. I have swallowed every insult you served me with a smile. I am stuffed, Mom. I could not eat another bite of your hypocrisy if I tried." Viola recoiled as if I had slapped her. She stepped back, covering her mouth with her hand. My father Otis stood on the porch staring at his shoes, unable to even look at me. Then the silence was shattered one last time. Trey's phone rang. He was still on his knees in the dirt. He fumbled for the phone, pulling it out of his pocket with shaking hands. The screen lit up with the name Richard Sterling, the CEO of MedTech, the man whose deal I had just crushed. "Answer it, Trey," I said, looking down at him. "Put it on speaker." Trey obeyed automatically. He tapped the screen and held the phone up like an offering. "Hello, sir," Trey whispered. Jackson Sterling's voice roared through the speaker, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I just got an email from the legal department at Nexus Global Logistics. They have formally blacklisted MedTech Solutions. They have cited a complete lack of confidence in our sales leadership." "Do you know what that means?" Trey sobbed. "Sir, I can explain. My brother, It means we are finished," Sterling screamed. "Our stock is going to tank by morning. The board is convening an emergency meeting to save the company. But they have already made one decision. You are fired, Jackson. Effective immediately. You are terminated for cause, which means no severance, no benefits, and I am contesting your unemployment claim. If you step foot on company property, security will have you arrested." "Sir, please," Trey begged, tears streaming down his face. "I have a mortgage. I have debt. You cannot do this." I just did. Sterling spat. "You are a cancer, Trey, and I just cut you out." The line went dead. Trey dropped the phone. It landed in the dirt next to the broken gift card he had thrown at me earlier. He looked up at me. He looked at the brother he had called a loser. He realized that in the span of 1 hour, he had lost his job, his girlfriend, his bonus, and his dignity. Isaiah, he wept, crawling forward and grabbing the hem of my pants. Isaiah, please. You have to help me. You are the chairman. You can fix this. Call him back. Tell him to hire me back. Or hire me at your company. I will drive a truck. I will sweep floors. Anything. Please do not leave me like this. I looked down at him. I felt a flicker of the old Isaiah, the big brother who used to protect him on the playground. But then I remembered the $50. I remembered the laughter. I remembered him telling me to lie about who I was so I wouldn't embarrass him. I leaned down close to his face. You gave me some advice earlier, Trey, I said. You told me to lie about my job so I wouldn't sound pathetic. You told me to pretend to be someone else. Trey nodded frantically, wiping snot from his nose. Yes, I was wrong. I am sorry. I stood up and straightened my jacket. I think it was good advice, I said, cold as ice. I am going to take it. Trey looked confused. What do you mean? I mean that when Richard Sterling or anyone else asks me about you, I am going to lie, I said. I am going to tell them that I have never met Trey Jackson in my life. I am going to tell them that I have no brother, because the brother I loved died the moment you decided money was more important than blood. Trey let out a wail of despair that echoed into the night. He collapsed face forward into the gravel, sobbing uncontrollably. I turned to David. We are leaving. I stepped into the limousine, but before I closed the door, I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a set of keys. They were the keys to my 2018 Ford F-150, the rusted truck that Trey had forced me to park down the street. I tossed the keys out onto the driveway. They landed with a metallic clink right next to Trey's head. You are going to need a ride, I said. The bank is coming for the Mercedes in the morning. Consider the truck a severance package. It runs good. It just needs a driver who isn't afraid of a little mud. I pulled the heavy door shut. The world outside was instantly silenced. The crying, the begging, the wind, it all disappeared, replaced by the hushed quiet of the cabin. I sat back in the leather seat and exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for 5 years. To the airfield, Sir David asked from the front. To the airfield, I replied. Washington is waiting. The limousine pulled away, moving with the grace of a shark through dark water. I watched through the tinted glass as my parents' house grew smaller and smaller. I saw my mother standing on the lawn watching her retirement plan drive away. I saw my father looking at the ground. And I saw Trey clutching the keys to an old truck, realizing that it was the only thing he had left in the world. We drove through the neighborhood past the perfectly manicured lawns and the silent houses. We merged onto the highway, accelerating toward the private airstrip, where my jet was fueled and ready. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the console. I took a sip. It was cool and refreshing. They say you cannot choose your family, but you can choose your future. For years I let them write my story. I let them put me on the cover of a paperback book titled Failure just because I wore work boots. They judged the book by its cover, but they forgot that I was the one who owned the library. I looked out at the city lights blurring past. I thought about the vaccines sitting in my cargo planes waiting to save lives. I thought about the thousands of employees who relied on my decisions. I did not need my father's approval. I did not need my mother's pride. And I certainly did not need my brother's respect. I had the respect of the world. Tonight, while they sat in that cold house eating dry turkey and blaming each other for their ruin, I would be at 30,000 feet flying toward a purpose that was bigger than their small minds could comprehend. I took another sip of water and smiled. My father was right about one thing. The turkey does taste better when you eat it in peace. Have you ever had to walk away from people who were weighing you down? Have you ever been judged by someone who had no idea what you were actually capable of? Do not let anyone define your worth based on the clothes you wear or the car you drive. Real power does not need to shout. Real success does not need to show off. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that the underdog sometimes runs the whole game. And tell me in the comments below, what is the best revenge you have ever gotten on someone who underestimated you? I am Isaiah Jackson, and this is my story. Thank you for watching. Isaiah's story serves as a powerful reminder that true power does not need to announce itself. We live in a world obsessed with the appearance of success titles, luxury cars, and designer labels. But often the people making the biggest impact are the ones making the least noise. His family's downfall came from the fatal mistake of confusing humility with failure. The ultimate lesson is that you should never let someone else's narrow perception define your reality. Your worth is not measured by the mud on your boots, but by the empire you build while everyone else is busy pretending. If you have ever been the black sheep who was actually the wolf in disguise, hit that like button and share this story. I want to know. Have you ever been underestimated by the people closest to you? Share your moment of vindication in the comments below.